We are now recording.
Around about 3 or 4 years ago, I was a speaker at an event in Reading in the UK, and I went along to this event, and halfway through, I noticed somebody walking around very interested in the books that were being sold, and the young lady in question came over and spoke to me, and we immediately hit it off and started chatting about areas of mutual interest. And since then, today's guest, Samantha Treasure, has become a part of my extended family, as it were, team, whatever you want to call it, because we share a great deal of interest in terms of paranormal phenomena and such like. Now, I'll tell you a little bit of a snapshot of Sam in terms of her background and everything. By background, Sam is a Canadian, but her parents are English. But I'll just tell you a little bit about the details generally. And Samantha Treasure has a lifelong interest in dreams and out-of-body experiences, and is currently studying for a master's in Medical Anthropology at SOAS University of London, where she hopes to further explore these subjects. The topic of her undergraduate thesis was social encounters in lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences, a qualitative UK study. Her main interests are in the differentiation between self and other in different states, and how the development of paranormal cosmologies. And I think that in many ways is a very important area of research, because it's one of these areas that we need to get more scientific about it. We need to understand far more exactly what is taking place when people are in altered states of consciousness, when they are in out-of-body experiences, where they have out-of-body experiences where they share these experiences with other people. Because one of the major questions is that the only reason that we consider this reality to be a real reality is because it's consensual, because we share it and we agree with the sensory input we're receiving. But there is strong evidence that people in dream sequences do exactly the same thing. Now, I know that Sam was particularly interested in this work because of her own family background and everything else as well, and members of her own family and people she's known over the years. So Sam, if you can tell us a little bit about you and how you became interested in this kind of material, because it's rather unusual to find a young academic that is so interested in areas that are so esoteric. So can you tell me a little bit about how you came along and why, basically?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a very strange old Victorian, apparently haunted farmhouse in the countryside of Canada. And people reported having experiences there, like seeing an apparition or hearing footsteps and all sorts of different things. And I had very vivid dreams since I was very young. Actually, my first memory is of a dream when I was about 3 years old. And I had lucid dreams as a kid as well. And then when I was about 8 years old, my little brother, who was about 6, he woke up from a nap on the sofa, and he said that he had just gone out of his body, gone outside, and saw our neighbor walking over to the house with a cherry cheesecake. Now, me and my mom had been in the room the whole time. We didn't see him get up and look out the window. Even if he had, he couldn't have seen the road or anything like that. But my mom stood there arguing with him, saying, no, it was just a dream, it was just a dream. And he said, no, it's not a dream, it was real. Which is something a lot of people say when they have out-of-body experiences, because it's so convincing. And while they were arguing, there was a knock at the door, and it was my neighbor, and she was holding a cherry cheesecake. And it's a bit far-fetched to call it a coincidence, because I remember thinking, I've never even heard of a cherry cheesecake. 8 years living in the house, she brought food over maybe 3 or 4 times, so it was very unusual. And so I remember standing there thinking, okay, this has to be added to my world model of what is possible. Now that I know that this is possible, how do I do it? I have to know how to do this. This is amazing. So every couple of years, I would get really interested in this, and I would go to the library and I would get books out on astral projection and try these techniques. So I was trying this from age, 8, 9. I was a big bookworm when I was a kid. So I never actually was able to have an out-of-body experience, but I did get to this vibrational state that people talk about experiencing before they feel themselves floating out of their body. But I just kept trying and it just didn't work for me. So I completely gave up. But I still had lucid dreams every now and then, and I wanted to learn how to have more and more lucid dreams. So I went to these workshops and I read Stephen LaBerge's book on lucid dreaming, and every single night for 30 minutes before I went to sleep, I would practice this technique, this meditation. And after 2 weeks, I didn't have anything. So I remember going up. At the time, it was very cold in my apartment, and there was a mezzanine above the kitchen. So I would sleep up there because heat rises. So I kind of trudged up to my bed, and I picked up the book, and then I realized, no, it's not working, I'm going to give up. And I actually flung the book across the room and just fell straight asleep. And the next thing I knew, I was downstairs in the hall, underneath where my body was sleeping, and a few feet away towards the front door. And I'm standing there, and I believe that I'm completely awake, and I couldn't remember how I got there. And the whole experience lasted about 4 or 5 minutes. And then it culminated in me waking up in bed, and I was like, what is that? That wasn't a dream like any dream I've had before. I've had lucid dreams. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like sleep paralysis. I thought I was awake the entire time. And that's something that's very similar to apparitional experiences, which Celia Green talks about a lot, and I'll go into the similarities a bit more later, where people see an apparition, but they don't realize they're looking at an apparition until it disappears. So then when I was in a lucid dream workshop a couple of months later, and people were talking about out-of-body experiences and describing them, and then I realized, oh my God, okay, that was an out-of-body experience. That's interesting, but I didn't think so at the time because I don't recall actually leaving my body. But that's something that I found in my research since, that a lot of people, especially the more OBEs they have, they might just suddenly be outside of their body. And again, that's another thing that Celia Green talks about a lot in her book on out-of-body experiences. So I was having these lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences, and I was having them more and more and more. And I was studying geology at the time. And I remember looking at this rock and kind of having this realization, like, what am I doing with my life? I'm having out-of-body experiences at night, and I'm studying rocks. Okay. Is it like, to use an analogy, is it like if this was Minecraft, like a video game, and instead of studying the game, I'm studying the pixels of the rocks, of the environment that makes it up. So then in my final year, I just ended up deciding to quit university, and I took about a year out. I consulted with parapsychologists to see, if you want to study this phenomena, what discipline should you study? And it was almost a consensus that you should study anthropology. So then that led me to go back to university and start from scratch and do that. But one of the things that I found really interesting was that when I go to workshops and talks on the subjects, when I read books, for the most part, people talk about lucid dreams and OBEs like two completely different creatures. And they place a lot of value on each of them. It's like almost like there's two camps. There's people who, there's a lot of people actually who believe that OBEs don't exist, that they're just a type of dream. And then of course that depends on your definition of dream. We don't really have a good definition of dream anyway. And they tend to also see lucid dreams as very valuable because you have a lot of agency and you have a lot of control over that environment. But then that's a cultural value as well, because in a lot of non-Western cultures, they use lucid dreams much in the same way we use OBEs in the West, in that we defer to the dream's wisdom. We become lucid and then we watch and learn what the dream or that environment is telling us. And then you've got other people who believe that OBEs are better. People might say at a talk, I had this experience, and then somebody else might say, that was just a dream, or that was a lucid dream. But just is an important kind of value judgment there. And the OBE is real, right? So, But then one thing that I experienced dozens of times was an experience where I was completely cognitively aware, like in waking, like in a lucid dream, like in an OBE, but I was unsure in that time whether it was a lucid dream or an OBE, because it seemed to have qualities of both. So in order to understand this more, I created an online questionnaire and asked, one of the questions I asked was, have you ever been completely cognitively aware, but you weren't sure whether it was a lucid dream or an OBE? And 44% of the people came back and said yes. And then they clarified it mainly by saying it's difficult to tell the difference between real content and hallucinatory content. So again, we've got these judgments of, you know, the OBE being real and the lucid dream being imaginary. So that's something that I wanted to learn more about. And like Freud says that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. There's an anthropologist, Sylvie Poirier, who says dreams are the royal road to culture. But I would say that specifically lucid dreams and OBEs and other experiences like that, sleep paralysis, for example, those are the real royal road to culture, because when you're in that state, you have cognitive awareness. So you're actually reacting to that state, that experience, based on your waking beliefs and based on your memory of your culture. So so that's what I was looking at in my dissertation, comparing lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences with people who have had social encounters in both.
And this is intriguing, isn't it? When we talk about social encounters, what we're talking about here was something that I was talking about before, the idea that there is this reality which is consensual because we're both sitting in a bar and we look out and we actually see people walking around and we say, there's a guy with a red coat, and we'll both agree there's a guy with a red coat. And this is what makes us believe that this is real. But when you're in an OBE state or a lucid dream state, and people come back and report the same things, it suggests that this reality is a similar consensual perception, and it's a shared perception in exactly the same way, which then leads us to question exactly what is real and what is not, and whether there's stepped levels of reality. Now, in terms of your interpretation, you jumped in very much in, I was very interested in your point about the consensus of opinion was that anthropology was the route to go forward, because I thought that was quite revolutionary, the idea that we actually look at it as an anthropological issue rather than a sociological or a psychological issue, which was intriguing. But also, can you just explain a little bit, when you use the term lucid dream, what do you mean? And then when you use the term OBE, exactly what you mean. So tell us a little bit about the background to these terms, who first coined them and these kind of things, and exactly what they mean. Okay,
right. Well, it's a difficult one because there's so many different definitions of both. But out-of-body experience was coined by Celia Green, who wrote a book, I think in the 60s, on out-of-body experiences. She collected reports via the radio and the newspaper advertisements, and got back, I think, hundreds or thousands of reports from across the UK. And she also studied lucid dreams, so did a comparison there. But I would say, like, basically a lucid dream, the main definition is when you're dreaming and you realize you're in a dream. And most dreams we recall are REM dreams before we wake up.
Can you just, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that rapid eye movement sleep. And historically, dreams were associated with that state, but now we know we also dream in non-REM sleep as well, and when we're under anesthesia as well. So, so lucid dreams mostly occur as well in REM sleep, in REM dreams, because a lucid dream is basically your prefrontal cortex becoming activated while you're dreaming. This is much easier to do in REM dreams than non-REM dreams. as you start to have more and more lucid dreams, you might also have lucid non-REM dreams, which can also be quite different and quite more thought-like, maybe, more like viewing a movie sometimes. And there's also maybe some connection here with OBE's Tadas Stumbris wrote a paper on non-REM dreams, and he found that by waking up one of his participants during her non-REM sleep, the participant said that she had felt that she was floating out of her body. So that made me think, well, isn't OBE just a lucid non-REM dream? But of course, people have OBEs from lucid dreams and from waking, when they're relaxed, when they're awake, or when they have accidents, etc. An out-of-body experience, what is an out-of-body experience? Most people that have them say that it is not like a dream, it is not like a lucid dream, it's completely different. The one way that I differentiate it was by the transition from the conscious waking state, which is quite difficult to do, especially in a lucid dream. So that's called a wake-induced lucid dream, or a wild, where you don't have any period of unconsciousness. And I've only been able to do this 3 times, 2 of them after taking galantamine, which a lot of people use for lucid dreaming.
What is galantamine? Can you explain?
Galantamine is an over-the-counter medication that was created for Alzheimer's. Okay. But people have found if they take it in the middle of the night, it can give them lucid dreams. And the past couple of years, there's been quite a few papers on that. So what the wake-induced lucid dream is like is, first you get this hypnagogic imagery, these outlines of images against the sort of black background of your eyelids. And then over time, over the experience, you get color, they start to fill in, they start to move more, it starts to become a bit more 3D. And then you start to get sound, but it's quite muffled. And then all of a sudden, like you're turning up a dial, it becomes very clear and you're in the dream. And everything is, clear and vivid, and there's color. And it feels like you're teleporting, like you kind of fading away from the world and fading into this dream. The transition to an out-of-body experience feels very much the opposite, where you're actually going outside of your body rather than inside of your mind and your imagination. And what normally happens is you get these sensations of vibrating in your body. It could be one part of your body, it can be your whole body. It could be sort of stable, or it could be undulating, again, in one part or your entire body. You can get very loud noises, which either sound like they're coming from in your head or in the room or somewhere. And if all of these very intense sensations don't snap you back to waking consciousness, then you'll start to feel like you're separating from your body. And this can be floating with varying degrees of resistance, or you can feel like you're peeling away from your body or rolling out of your body. And then you seem to be in the sleep environment, which is also interesting, going back to non-REM dreams, because they say that non-REM dreams have more day residues, so content from that day and the day before, and especially, I guess, the most immediate content you have before sleeping is your sleep environment. So that might be another connection to look into with non-REM dreams, or there might be some kind of something that's going on in the brain during non-REM dreams that's also happening during an OBE state. Who knows? So, and then you can feel like, it seems like more difficult to move sometimes, or to see or to speak in this experience, which is sometimes similar to sleep paralysis as well. There's a lot of overlap between these two experiences. And a lot of people use sleep paralysis as
okay. Can you now explain again sleep paralysis here as to how this fits in as well? And you mentioned the term hypnagogia as well. You didn't mention hypnopompia, but again, just so we get our definitions, what we mean by these things.
So hypnagogia is those are the images that you get as you drift into sleep. And then hypnopompia are the images you get as you drift from sleep back to wakefulness. And then sleep paralysis is basically what happens when your body is paralyzed when you're dreaming in REM sleep to protect yourself from acting out your dreams. But this is kind of almost like a glitch where you become lucid while this is happening, and the content of the experience can be quite similar to an OBE in that the environment is very stable and like a non-REM dream, but the social content is quite similar to a lucid dream, or actually a non-lucid REM dream, which tends to be more aggressive than any other of these experiences. Lucidity actually makes dreams less aggressive, they found. So you tend to get this very realistic, scary experience of some kind of entity being in the room with you.
Okay, because that's intriguing, isn't it? The entity, the hag that people see in these dreams. And again, you made a very interesting point there about non-REM sleep containing elements of your waking in the environment of the bedroom. So here what we have is the imposition of a dream creature or something that is symbolic within the external environments created by your mind of locating yourself in three-dimensional space, because of course we do that all the time. You know, it's how we maneuver our way around the three-dimensional world. What do you think? I know that as an anthropologist, I know that you've lived and worked in Japan, you speak fluent Japanese and everything else as well, and you're also interested in Korean and other cultures. Does the hag phenomenon, does that actually occur in non-Western societies, or is this exclusively ours?
No, it happens a lot, and there's a high prevalence of sleep paralysis in Japan for some reason. So I have been in this country for 10 years now, and I haven't been to Japan for 6 years. So that was all before I went to university. So I haven't really, I've kind of dipped into papers here and there and found differences in, you know, the ways that people approach sleep paralysis studies. In Korea, they tend to, I think they look more at nightmares, and in Japan they look more at stress or something, or vice versa. I don't know, but it's definitely found all over the world, sleep paralysis. And the interesting thing, it's always like social content. So one point that David Hufford made, he wrote a few books on sleep paralysis, was that it's social content. It's not just any threat. You don't kind of wake up in sleep paralysis and your room is on fire. At least I've never heard an experience like that. He hasn't either. So it is this social content. And there are some researchers in Finland now, dream researchers, who've come out with papers this year and last year with theories about the social simulation theory, that the main purpose of dreams is to create social simulations to help us survive in our waking life. Whether I agree with that, I don't really know, but it's an interesting thing to look into.
I think the issue here, isn't it, and I know you and I have discussed this many, many times, is the way in which the subconscious creates not only a reality that seems to fool us a lot of the time. When I dream, I've only ever become lucid once in my dream state. But when we're in these dream states, the reality that our mind creates is completely real. It convinces us. We never ever, or very few of us, but lucid dreamers I guess do, realize that we're in a dream state. We just take it as being a fact. Mm-hmm. Now, ordinarily, you would think the opposite would occur, wouldn't you? You'd think that dream states would be such a surprise that all the time you think, oh, I must be dreaming, but we don't. Mm-hmm. Now, the question that I've always asked myself is, who is and I know that Robert Waggoner was particularly interested in this idea, is who is the bricoleur? Who is the person that's actually creating the narrative of the dream scenario? Because we are a witness to it. We're not recognizing it. We're a witness to the events, as if there's an unfolding drama that has been created from somewhere for us. So it's easy to say that, yes, it's a way of us managing our social scenarios by testing them out beforehand. But I've never actually had that feeling in my dreams, because my dreams are normally quite curious and strange and unusual, or incredibly prosaic. But what they always are somehow believable. So in your research or in your experiences of lucid dreaming, the scenarios, I know, because again, we've discussed many of your lucid dreams, the scenarios you have are incredibly elaborate, but incredibly believable. I mean, can you give us some examples of, and indeed, what is your opinion of this? Do you think there's more going on here, or do you think we're moving into some other form of reality, or is it literally just a very elaborate hallucination?
I think this is the big question, is what is real, and what is this kind of mechanism that goes on in our brain of processing and simulating things, you know? And I think there can be sometimes an overlap as well. I have heard and experienced a lot about shared dreams, or shared lucid dreams, shared OBEs. When people say that in an OBE they can see what's real, you know, they're basically witnessing the physical world from a different point of view. I think that can also happen when you're awake. There's been, you know, ESP phenomena and telepathy and that kind of thing, but just in different ways, you know, that these manifest. So some will be more auditory or visual, or some more emotional, that kind of thing. But I took part in this OBE experiment a few years ago during this retreat. And what we were supposed to do was have a password to ourselves. So don't tell anyone, don't write it down or anything. And then that night we would try to have an out-of-body experience and get somebody else's password. And the next day, there was one person who was very, very good at going out of body. And she came down and she said to me, yeah, I saw you. You were sleeping next to so-and-so, and you were both sitting up. You were talking to her, and I interrupted you and I said, what is your password? And she says to me, I didn't really get yours. It was something like Snow Drew. And I thought that's unbelievable, because when they said, think of a password, the very first thing I thought was snowdrop, which is one of the ingredients that galantamine is derived from. At the time, I was really into galantamine, so and then I thought, no, I'm going to choose something easy like orange or something like that, because you know, there's people here that English isn't their first language. So, but she got that. And then the person next to me, she said, yours was navel, and she was, you know, into sports and everything, and she goes, well, it was abdominals. Same, you know, meaning, but different dreams. This one, the one next to me, remembered, I don't know if she remembered it as a dream or an OBE, which is another strange thing to think about, but she said she saw this cartoon-like bumblebee around her, and her password turned out to be bee or bumblebee. I had absolutely no recollection of any dream or out-of-body experience, but presumably this happened. So this is another thing, you know, when people say just a dream, maybe you could have just a non-lucid dream, but for somebody else, they're communicating with you, but for them it's an OBE, you know, like how does it work? It's just bizarre.
I think this is the thing, isn't it? It is so, as you say, it's so bizarre, it's so uncanny. And it is something that is really telling us something deeply significant about the true nature of consciousness and reality, and how consciousness and reality can overlap in some way. Mm-hmm. Because how on earth could somebody within our modern scientific model of reality, and how the brain supposedly is just an epiphenomenon of chemistry reacting with electricity in the brain, which of course is nonsense, because, well,
when we're awake, things go on in our brain. It doesn't mean that our waking world is made up, you know, or maybe it is.
Yeah.
But that's not really a good argument.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's what is really going on here now. For instance, it seems that there seemed to be some form of external communication taking place between you and the other members of this group that One could argue, couldn't you? You could say it was coincidence, but then again, that is the catch-all phrase they always use. You know, it's just.
I think we should embrace complexity.
I think we should. I think it's important that we do this, because we are missing a huge trick here. And I think this is why the kind of research you're doing and other brave people are actually pushing the envelope and saying, look, you know, we can't be going on forever making out that we can just explain these things, because we're missing a trick here, because it's telling us something and might tell us the great mysteries, you know, of David Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness. This might be the answer that we're looking for. You know, maybe consciousness, and I'm going to ask you this question because it is an intriguing one. What would your idea be that consciousness, that lucid dreaming and shared lucid dreaming and these things seem to suggest that consciousness exists as a field outside of the brain, and we attune in, that the brain attunes into a field of information, and sometimes that field of information can be shared, just like two radios can share a radio wave. I mean, have you had any experiences of that kind of thing yourself? Because you're a classic example of both an experiencer and a researcher, so that's very important.
Yeah, I would say so. So there's often, people have a lot of beliefs about having different levels of the soul, almost, and I think there could also be different levels of the environment. So there's, who was it? I think the Asavano and Papua New Guinea. They talk about the big soul and the little soul, and when you're asleep, your big soul goes out and has adventures, and those are what your dreams are. And when you're awake or in trance, your big soul and your little soul are together in your body, but you can still communicate with the spirit world. But it manifests in different ways, you know. So that I find is interesting. And then there's other people who believe that they're not just communicating with these spirits and that they have different levels of the soul, but they also have different levels of the environment, and they have relationships with their environment, not only with other people. One very interesting thing that I read, and I keep referencing Celia Green's book because it's amazing, but she has there's this report of somebody who has an OBE, and they turn around and they see their physical body there, and they actually have a conversation with their physical body. Now that's very interesting, because maybe the Asvana are onto something here. Maybe we do have like a big soul and a little soul or something. Maybe the big soul was communicating with the little soul, which stayed with the physical body. And then that kind of leads as well to the idea of the doppelganger, which is very, very interesting. And I think it's what connects out-of-body experiences to the paranormal. So there was a sociologist at Duke University in the 50s, Cornell Hart, and he worked with the Society for Psychical Research. He did some studies on out-of-body experiences, which he called traveling ESP. And he gathered over 200 reports of people that had OBEs, and he was especially interested in the ones that where the person was trying to project to another person's house or a boat even, and then it was their doppelganger was seen by that person. And he noticed that there are a lot of similarities between apparitions of the living and the dead. And I know I mentioned this to you before about Emily Bronte and Percy Shelley. So there's a book by Edward Chitham, A Life of Emily Bronte, and he goes really deep into her life, and he sees all of her notebooks and everything, and he believes that since she was 13 years old, she was reading Percy Shelley, and that she had actually seen him as a ghost or as a vision. And she does indeed write a few poems about somebody who died during a storm overseas, who's buried overseas, who has been forsaken by God, who is a poet, all of these things. So he believes that she saw his ghost. And another interesting thing he found was that in one of the papers where she actually writes about the vision, in the margin, she draws a serpent with wings. And he claims she would not have known this at the time, but there are papers that Percy Shelley wrote, and he draws the same thing of a winged serpent. And he notes that the other drawings on the page are very dreamlike, and it's almost like she was in a trance state. And of course, Percy Shelley saw his own doppelganger before he died. So there's all of these, you know, connections that come together. There's even one with my brother, which is really strange. So he had out-of-body experiences as a kid. He had a few of them. And when we were teenagers, we were kind of living in two different homes, and I was living with both of my brothers, and then the other one went to live back with my father. And he used to do this thing in the morning where he'd wake up and he would beat his chest like a gorilla. And so he had been gone for a week or two. My younger brother was completely spooked because he said he was in the living room, and right behind him, he heard this loud as anything beating his chest. Again, this is the kind of doppelganger thing, you know. It's very, very interesting, that connection.
The whole doppelganger thing, you know, we really need to talk more about this because...
Yeah. Oh, I got more on that.
Oh, right. Because as you know, in my book, The Daemon, A Guide to Your Extraordinary Secret Self, I have a whole section on Shelley and his doppelganger encounter a few days before he drowned, because he was walking outside along a walkway in this villa they were renting, and he saw his own doppelganger walk towards him, and it turned around and it said to him, "Are you happy?" And it was quite precise. Now, of course, we know that in Middle European legend, there is always the concept of you see your double, it means it's a harbinger of death. And on top of this, and I'd never thought about it before, of course, the German, the doppelganger, is actually, it means double walker in English. It's as if somebody who walks with you, you know, somebody who walks along. And that intrigues me in the sense that suddenly we're getting something slightly different. You know, the standard explanation is hoitoscopy or autoscopy, whereby, you know, you see a double of yourself and you are conscious and consciously aware of you are in the double, or you're looking down at yourself. So clearly this is and it links very close to schizophrenia. It's reported a lot in schizophrenia.
Yeah.
It's one of the precursors of schizophrenia.
Absolutely.
But you were going to say that there's more to this. So you now have me fascinated.
Yes. Because this leads us back to what is real and what is a hallucination. So 2 years ago, I did another out-of-body experiment. So I'm part of this paranormal investigating group called Team Impact. They're based in Bristol, so I don't do as much with them as I would like. But 2 years ago, we were called to go investigate this workplace because people had seen apparitions there, and they had heard furniture moving on its own. A bunch of stuff had happened, and they couldn't explain it, so they asked us to come in. So we had this place for 3 weekends throughout that year. We had it all to ourselves, and we even slept on site, which I think is an important factor that's missing from a lot of paranormal investigations, either for entertainment or otherwise. So it's a popular hobby now in the UK, going on these paranormal events, and they normally occur between 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. But paranormal experiences don't just happen when we're awake. You know, what happens when you sleep in an apparently haunted place? There's some places where people say they get a lot of sleep paralysis for some reason. There are some places where a group of people will sleep and they'll all have the same kind of theme running through their dreams. And then these places kind of get a sort of legendary status over time through this. And I don't know why that is, that some places seem to bring this out, or maybe it's the groups that go there, you know. I don't know, but so we decided, since we had the place overnight, I had read about these experiments done in the 1970s with a medium called Alex Tannis, and he said that he could go out of his body and go into haunted homes and speak with the spirits, and then that would basically exorcise the home because the spirits were satisfied with having told him their stories in that OBE state. So then they left the property. So that was one thing that he did, which was very interesting. Because of course that's another thing, cross-culturally people believe that they can go out of their body and they can speak with the dead or with ancestors and get information back. Another thing that he did with university-based parapsychologists was to go out of his body and go into a room and try to see the object that was hidden in a box. And his hit rate was very high. He was very successful with that. So I thought, let's use this opportunity to both, ask out-of-body experiencers if they can go out of their body, and if they come across any people wandering around the building, to also try the password exchange that happened a few years before. And then thirdly, to go into another room and see the object that was placed in the middle of the room in a chair. And so we went to sleep around 10 o'clock. The participants changed, depending on the night. Some nights it was just me trying it. Some nights there were 2 or 3 of us. But we would go to sleep about 10 o'clock, and then the investigation proper would happen in the building, and they would set up the room. They would set up motion detectors and CCTV at the door and in the room to make sure nobody was cheating, and to also maybe capture anything that did happen. So that was the setup. And as far as the passwords go, we didn't get any hits there. As far as apparitions or something, I was able to go out of body, as was another participant. We both encountered beings. For me, my experience was very stable and out-of-body experience-like until I went outside, and suddenly it was no longer the middle of the night in February with snow on the ground. It was daytime in summer, and it appeared to be the 1800s, and there was a little girl there. So that was very strange. But the very interesting thing that I found was there seemed to be a theme running through different states of consciousness here. So one of the things that happened was one night I was sharing a room with my friend who had lots of out-of-body experiences. And I was having this really strange dream that a girl from work who I'd done first aid on, I met with her, but the dream took on a very strange, kind of creepy feel to it. And I felt like there was something a bit off about her. And I felt really ill at ease. And then all of a sudden, the dream switched, and it was very OBE-like. A lot of my OBEs are quite like dark and grainy and a bit bluish or grayish. And another thing that a lot of people say is, I'm out of body, I can see people, but they can't see me. Or they look at me and they like I'm a ghost, which is another story. But I could see these 2 men sitting at a bar and they couldn't see me. I was listening in on their conversation. And one of them, he seemed like, I don't know if I believe in evil, but he seemed evil. And he turned to his friend and said, I pretended to be this girl that she knew from work. And then I became close to her, and now we're friends. And I woke up and I just had this really weird, creepy feeling. I mean, the building was creepy enough as it was. And in the morning, my friend said she was able to have an out-of-body experience. And she kind of woke up in the OBE, and she saw me leaning over her, and she thought, Sam's gone out of body and she's helping me out of body. But then she kind of looked and went, Sam? And she said my face was kind of going like this, almost mask-like, and there seemed to be something a bit off about me. And she looked and she could see me sleeping on my bed. And from all of this, she deduced this was an imposter. Now, during the waking state, one of the team members saw another of our team walk around the corner, he was around the corner with him, and then he went back downstairs, and then he saw him walk back around the corner as if he'd forgotten something and kind of look a bit confused and then go back. So he put his head around the corner like, are you okay? Did you forget something? And he was all the way at the end of the corridor with somebody else who vouched for him having been there the whole time. And this was the most cynical person in the team. who believes, you know, he believes that if you see a ghost, it's just your mind making something up out of, I don't know, the plant in the room or something like that. So, but he said, I saw him like, you know, really there. But is that his doppelganger? Is it an imposter? Is it the mind creating this social content of people that we know and projecting that into the waking world? You know, it's difficult. And somebody, I did a talk on Lucid Dreams last year, I think, and somebody came to me after and they said, in Western Australia, they believe that it's very dangerous to have an out-of-body experience for the reason that it's difficult to tell the difference between what's real and what's not. So they have to be initiated. They have to go through 2 different initiations, and nobody outside of their group knows what the second initiation is, what it consists of. But they make it very, very difficult for people to do this. And then some other people, they believe that, yeah, dreams are OBEs and they're completely safe because if there's any danger, you could just fly away. But this is another thing that I think is, I think a lot of people don't want to talk about because we're trying to get rid of the stigma of these experiences. But sometimes we do have scary experiences in an OBE or in a lucid dream. And I think it's important to talk about and, you know, try not to scare people, to try not to be afraid of it and to try and explore it more. So one interesting thing that happened to Chris Howley, who's in the same team, I think he mentions this on a paranormal program as well, but he has spent hundreds of nights at a place called Woodchester Mansion. So whenever there's a group that goes there at night, he's there to show them around, do health and safety and all that. And he normally stays in a room and waits until they leave and he locks up. But one night he was with a small group, and suddenly he saw this like shadow of a person kind of go by, and the next thing he knew, he was out of his body looking at himself from about 10 feet away, and he saw himself say to the group, "Get out!" So he thought in this out-of-body state, oh my God, I've been possessed, you know, by this shadow or whatever. I need to get back into my body and get everyone out of here. So he, you know, somehow got back into his body, but he was really shooken up by this. So again, we've got this not only OBE, paranormal, doppelganger connection, we've also got possession as well, you know. So these are all these things that we need to look into. What happens in our culture and other cultures? How do people interpret it? What causes it? Is it illness? Is it a substance somebody's taken? Is it something that we've watched? These are all things that need to be explored more.
This is the most important thing. I mean, many of the people who will be subsequently watching this probably know that Sam and I did an event at Drakelow Tunnels in April last year, where we recreated the concept of Plato's cave in these incredible complex of tunnels in the Midlands. But one of the guys that regularly goes there was telling me when I did a pre-run there about the entities that seem to inhabit these tunnels. And one of the things he told me, and it still sends shivers up my spine now, when he said that he had a can of Coke in his hand, and they felt that they heard noises and they heard the voices around them. And he decided, because the corridors run like a gridiron pattern, and he was standing at the apex of 2 of the tunnel, 4 of the tunnels, so it was a crossroads. And he said that he said, okay, I'm going to throw this empty can of Pepsi. It was Pepsi, actually, not Coke. I've got to get my branding right. And he threw it into the darkness, and he asked the entity to throw it back, and he threw it into the darkness. And it was thrown back at him, but it came down, whereas he threw it ahead of him, it came down one of the corridors along this side. So the thing had actually teleported between the 2 sections. And then he showed me a video that had been done in the very point we were standing. And you can actually see this shape of this being in the darkness, you know, and it's frightening and intriguing, which then segues beautifully into the whole point of why you're our special guest now, because when you've got your Sam ghost hunting hat on, what I'd like you to tell us is some of your, because it's Halloween coming up and everything. So can you tell us a little bit about the events you've been involved in the ghost hunting, and some scary stories or scary events while you were doing that?
I mean, I guess the main one is that location that we were at, which I can't say where it was because it is a workplace and they want to remain anonymous. But yeah, things had happened there. So people heard while we were there, the doppelganger was going to unpack his things in his room. Nobody else was in that side of the building, and he heard a door slam shut. So we went there and we were trying to, walking back and forth, trying to recreate this and trying to find some kind of rational explanation for this, looking at the door and, is there some kind of fault with the doors and that kind of thing. We couldn't. And another thing, which was weird, was one of the nights, somebody else thought that they heard a door slam, and then, it was just a false awakening or something. They woke up in bed, like sitting up. And a few of us, including me, had dreams of somebody like intruding into the door or knocks on the door as well. Somebody heard a knock on their door while they were awake and went out and looked at the CCTV and nothing was there. So there were a lot of things like this. But to be honest, when you're investigating a place, the weirdest thing that seems to happen is like technology will go haywire just at the right time. It's a timing thing. But for example, we were in a place a couple of weeks ago, and we kind of split up into groups, and then one of the groups said, okay, if there's anybody here, give us a sign. And just like that, all the lights turned off in the gardens. But then they found out that the clock had just struck 1:30, and that's the time that everything goes off. So things like that happen all the time. Yeah, I mean, we besides that building, there hasn't been anything like too crazy. There was once where we were upstairs, nobody else was in the building, and we heard what sounded like a cupboard slam downstairs. But yeah, things like that happen.
Intriguing, because I know that you, as the kind of the ghost hunter side of you, sounds very, very interesting in the things that you get involved in. Because again, you're doing it scientifically. You're looking at it using scientific equipment. You're going in there without any preconceptions or any pre-beliefs, because this is how science should work. It's the idea that I don't know what's going on, but something extraordinary is happening, and we need to pursue it. Now, one of the things that you and I were discussing recently, which we really need to continue talking about, really, is the concept of the doppelganger and the evil side of the doppelganger, because it was a term we were discussing a few days ago about the caco daemon.
Yeah.
And the idea that, because as you know, my daemon Eidolon dyad, could we put a different factor on here and say that there's more to this, that we have a dark side to ourselves? It's very Jungian, the shadow idea. And can we bring that in? So would you like to chat a little bit about that and what your thoughts are on that? And this is, I'm genuinely interested, because we didn't finish our conversation on this. So.
Well, that's the question is, who or what was it that my friend saw when she had an out-of-body experience in that so-called haunted building? Was that my cacodaemon, because it seemed a bit off. And then when she realized that it wasn't me, she pushed it out of the room. And she seemed to have this kind of battle with it, So, but again, was that maybe my little soul, or was it my shadow self or something? I mean, who knows?
Well, we do all, because we all have these elements of ourselves, don't we? We are many personalities, and as you know, I'm a qualified psychometrician, and I apply psychometrics to various exercises. And one of the things that you and I have discussed is the idea at some stage of either putting somebody into a hypnotic state, in which case we can actually draw up the daemon in some way. Yeah. And then would it be wonderful, wouldn't it, to actually then have that person do a psychometric questionnaire?
Yes, I think that's got to happen.
We're going to do this. We're going to do this. and then find out. Maybe we could hypnotize you. Maybe somebody like Alan could come along and hypnotize you.
Yeah,
and then we could
totally.
actually have the psychometric profiles, because they're probably going to be very different. And what does that say about human personality? You know, that we are multiple personalities. And I know I've written about multiple personality syndrome, and it's called dissociative personality syndrome now. But you just wonder whether these elements, that we're actually manifesting elements of ourselves that are externalizing in some way.
And then of course, I read your book on out-of-body experiences, and one thing that you talk about, which is interesting, is this locale 3 that Robert Monroe talks about. And you said you believe that, judging by people's reports of OBEs, that they're probably going into this locale 3, this kind of, how would you describe locale 3 based on the research?
Well, locale 3 is very much a kind of an environment that is completely different to this environment, but things go on. I mean, there was a wonderful example that Robert Monroe gives, you might remember in the book, where he has a concept called I there. And I there was somebody that he would, and it's something we were talking about as well, about fugue states in terms of temporal lobe epilepsy. But he was in a case whereby he would drop into this person's life. And again, Louis Solarat, who is a friend of you and I's, he's done a fantastic short movie, which I mean, we'll try and upload this because it's a fascinating application of this about either. But the idea is it's as if there's another you existing in another universe that you can drop into their mindset. And Robert Monroe gives one example where he was in where he suddenly goes to sleep, and then he's suddenly in either's body. And either apparently was about to negotiate some big business deal. And he's in his home, either's in his home, and there are these other business people. And he's halfway through a conversation when suddenly Robert drops into this person's mind. Now, of course, we know the term drop-ins from psychical research and mediumship, but he drops into this guy's mind. And of course, he's sitting there, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And he literally doesn't know what to say. And he said he could see either's wife looking at him thinking, what's wrong with you? Why can't you speak? And then he made some silly statement. And then he found himself going out of his body again and coming back to this reality. Now, could we extrapolate from this scenario to say that, say either experienced temporal lobe epilepsy, and what had actually happened is he went into an absence seizure state. And when he was in the absence seizure state, the other personality, which was also him, drops in and takes over. And this could explain some somnambulism. It could explain so many of these phenomena.
And again, we've got that connection between OBEs and possession, and all of these things kind of overlap. And then going back to what you just said about parts of the self that can maybe manifest or project, and going back to the OBE experiment, so I was able to, despite being incredibly hungover, I wasn't expecting to have any OBEs at all, but I was able to, apparently go out of body and go into the next room, which was the target room. And two things. One of the team members was in there, but I knew that because he was on call, he's search and rescue, his room was by the exit. So he couldn't have been in that room. He also seemed a little bit not himself. So when I spoke to him, his answers were almost like he didn't really know what to say. And because OBEs can seem very realistic, for a moment I thought, oh no, I've messed up. I'm actually awake and this isn't an OBE. But then I looked at the objects on the chair, and there wasn't one object, there was like 5, and I was complaining about that, saying, oh, well, there's only supposed to be one. And I noticed that some of them had a bit of a cartoon-like quality to them, which is sometimes, when that woman saw the bumblebee, the cartoon-like bumblebee, is that, does that mean that it's a thought form? Who knows? But this seems to come up a lot in interviews that I do. So I saw a couple of cartoon-like objects. There was a walkie-talkie, there was an object that I'd never seen before. It was a flat plastic, like hook-like thing. And I actually picked it up and looked at it, and I was like, I've never even seen this before. And then the experience kind of faded away. But in the morning, I went into the main room and I asked them, I told them what objects I had seen. And they said, well, I think it was a lighter that was actually on the chair. But they said, but while we were setting up for a few hours, there was a walkie-talkie on that chair. And the thing that I saw, the guy that does search and rescue, he said, he's a climber as well. And he goes, I think I've got one of those objects in my van right now. It's a line cutter. So we Googled line cutters, and I was like, yeah, that's what I saw. I've never gone climbing before, and maybe I have seen that, and I subconsciously, projected it or something. But that's what I saw. And we were also, the location was quite close to places where people do go climbing as well. So that's interesting. And again, like in your book, you mentioned the experiments that were done with Robert Monroe, that they tried to get him to go out of body and see what he could see in another room and that kind of thing. And there was always something just a bit off, right? Mm. So that could be locale 3 or something like that. I don't know. But I think that's very interesting to look into the content, not only the social content and how realistic does somebody seem. This is a thing people say in an OBE, the people I see are real. They're very other. And in a lucid dream, they're like props. They're like a part of myself. Or they're maybe like my higher self that I need to get advice from. Or they're symbolic and I can ask them a question and they might answer me about what they represent. But actually, Robert Wagner talks about the 1% of dream characters in lucid dreams that seem like they come from outside of the dream. And similarly, in out-of-body experiences, there can also seem to be almost dreamlike people that we run into. But then again, there's been reports of sort of telepathy and shared dreams or shared experiences all through different states of consciousness that we have, waking or asleep. So is that a part of somebody? Is it their daemon? Is it their capodaemon? Is it their subconscious? Is it their big soul?
Because all of this, isn't it? It's when you start to look at it again, it's shamanic. It's again the whole symbolism, the shamanism, the old idea, the idea of the upper world and the lower world and the middle world, the way in which you can actually meet the trickster, the way you can actually meet extrapolations of your own subconscious. For instance, in my new book, I have a whole section on a series of experiences that Myron Dial had when he was experiencing, when he has a shamanic journey, he gets dismembered and everything else as well. Now, again, Myron Dial has been on this show before. In fact, he's been on twice, I think. And some of his experiences are incredible. Now, I'm hoping, because breaking news, guys, I've been invited to speak in Southern California next May at a big event out in the desert in Indian Wells. And I'm hoping that maybe I can have the opportunity to meet Myron then. Because I feel that myself, Sam, and a lot of our group, we're creating this real egregore of ideas, and we're really pushing the envelopes now. And it's the first time I've really had the opportunity to give a little bit of an idea of the kind of things we do when we meet up, and the things we talk about, the ideas we spin out, because these are very, very important, because we need to do this. I mean, the term kakodemon is a term I've used before, but it was only something that Sam said to me recently, and I thought, no, there's more to this, and it's another element that we can actually move forward with. So very, very exciting time. Sam, been absolutely fantastic. It's just standard the way we just chat, and it's really good. So thank you very much for being the guest today. Now, Dia, one of the things that Sam and I have been discussing is that probably we could do a one-off show at some time in early December, when Sam could interview me for about my new book. And maybe we could use that, but we can discuss that in due course. So Sam, is there any way that people can get in contact with you, or, you know, if they're intrigued by your work, you know, your questionnaire, your online questionnaire and everything? Was that
yeah, sure. So the online questionnaire, the sort of findings and analysis of that are on www.zombiesinpjs.com, which is hideously out of date. I haven't updated the website in a long time, but I'm planning to. And also on Instagram at zombies in PJs.
Okay, and that comes from an episode of Erie, Indiana, does it?
Yeah.
I need to watch that, because I'm quite intrigued as to what actually happened in that particular program. But there you go. Sam Treasure, thank you very much for being our guest. And again, as always, thanks for Dia, who is behind the scenes over there in Denver, Colorado. And without Dia, none of this would happen. And as always, we thank her for that as well. Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.